Well, good day to you. It is June the 4th, and I hope you are having a wonderful day wherever you happen to be. If this is your first time ever listening to Search for Signs, I do want to thank you and welcome you. My name is Gary Willing, and what do we talk about? Well, we talk about the emergence of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. We talk about why are the Masters and the Teacher returning now to the everyday world? Why is it important that they do so? And of course, what does it mean for you? Now, typically, I'm the one doing the talking, and then I answer questions and so forth. In this video, we're going to do something quite different. I'm actually going to interview a very dear friend of mine who knows a lot about this story, and I want to get her perspective on some things. So, without further ado, I'm going to interview Betsy Whitfill, and hopefully you'll listen to the whole video, because I think she's got a wonderful perspective on what we talk about.
There we go. Betsy, are you there?
I am here, yeah.
Awesome. Well, this is take 2. I didn't merge the last call, so it wasn't recording anything. It was just running. So I do apologize about that, Betsy. Well, listen,
Sure.
A few months ago, I interviewed Betsy Whitfill. We talked about what we talk about on this channel about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom for her perspective a couple months ago. Today, we're going to take it in a different direction than I normally do in these videos, where we're going to talk about the most important thing I think that we all need to start educating ourselves on about the immediate future, about humanity and so forth, which is the principle of sharing. The teacher talks about it like this. He says, without sharing, there can be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. Without peace, there could be no future. So our very survival depends on whether we do this. That's why it's so important that we look at this, we discuss this, we read about it, in those kind of things. And today, Betsy has agreed to give a talk on the principle of sharing, and we're going to start by reading one of the articles that Benjamin Creme's master wrote entitled A Blueprint of Sharing, and then I get to ask the hard questions of her. So it's going to be quite refreshing for me, and I know she can handle it because she is from 2 very gritty states. One's from New Jersey, and the other one is from Texas. So anybody from those 2 states can handle my hardball questions, I'm sure. Right, Betsy?
That's right.
All right. Well, let's get on into it, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about some of this stuff.
Okay, so this article is from the November 5th issue of Share International magazine in 2013. When men consider the principle of sharing, they almost always see it in personal terms. They visualize a situation in which they personally will be expected to give away considerable sums of money to far-off people whom they do not know, nor care to know. In fact, the principle of sharing can only be organized as a global process. There are several ways in which this could be achieved, either partially or totally. We, your elder brothers, consider that the following is the most practical, the simplest, and fairest method of all, one which, if adopted, would satisfy the greatest number. Each nation, we suggest, would be asked to make an inventory of all their resources and needs, what they produce themselves and what they are obliged to import. Then each nation would be asked to put into a common pool that which they have in excess of their needs, forming a huge international resource from which all could draw. Naturally, the large developed nations would give a greater amount, but all would donate their unneeded surplus. This scheme appeals to us for its simplicity and fairness. It would, of course, take time to implement, but we foresee a time when it can be accomplished. Many are the trained organizers and administrators for whom this work would provide a welcome service to the world. All would proceed under the aegis of a master or at least a third-degree initiate to safeguard the trust of all. Thus, at a stroke, the curse of poverty and want would be ended. The hearts and lives of countless millions would be lifted into joy, and those who shared for the first time would find a happiness deep and satisfying, which perhaps they were afraid to know. In this way, only would be engendered the trust essential for the ending of war and terrorism. Without such trust, there will never be peace. Without peace, the future for mankind would be bleak indeed. Therefore, some form of sharing is essential if we are to survive. When the majority of men realize this, the major problems of the world can be solved. The principle of sharing is beginning to enter the minds of many groups throughout the world. Bit by bit, men inch their way to this conclusion. Maitreya reminds all who hear him that sharing alone provides the solution to our troubles. Thus, as the weeks and months go by, men can be seen to grapple with their problems and more find sharing to be the key to their future.
You know, and with all of the master's articles, it's always better for each and every one of us to read this ourselves so we can internalize these words. As Betsy was reading it out, I was reading it along with you and see it in a different way than I would even if I just read it myself, you know, and so the simplicity and the truth of what he's saying is there. So we talk about on this channel a lot about the religious aspect of this information, but it really is about this, about the principle of sharing, about the need to create peace. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, and as we all always, or I always say, without peace we have no future.
And so that would be every one of us, right? Not just
that's right.
Not just
that's
the Muslims or the Hindus.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
So where do you think? Or let me ask you this. Maitreya's on TV, obviously not recognized as Maitreya right now. He's introducing himself just as an ordinary person, correct?
Yes, that's what we hear. Uh-huh.
Yes. So I guess my point would be, do you think that he is going to more and more start to talk about the need for sharing in terms of bringing about justice and how important it is? I mean,
yes.
More. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the energies of Aquarius, which are saturating the planet now, are encouraging, inspiring people to get together in large groups for a group purpose. Now, the energy is not good or bad. It's just the energy that's drawing people into groups. Maitreya's task is to help the people understand how to use this group, this synthesizing energy, in a way that will solve our problems. And so when he talks about sharing, he is teaching people how to think about how to use the energies which everyone is now feeling. You can just look anywhere and you see that there are no one people doing this or that. People immediately, if they have something they want to accomplish, they'll get a group of people together. And the reality of the power of groups is a very Aquarian response to those energies. So yes, Maitreya is suggesting and probably even explaining to his whatever audience he has that the problems that we see now, which are really since 2013, the problems have certainly accumulated and grown larger. Mm-hmm. And so he is teaching humanity, inspiring us to understand our interconnectedness and the power that interconnectedness has over our lives. We can no longer ignore that.
Now, taking the first paragraph here, and this is something that I think when I bring up the principle of sharing and people talk about the concerns that they have when they hear this, they get stuck in this first part, and if you want to You want me to read it out real quick?
Go ahead.
You know what?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, when men consider the principle of sharing, they almost always see it in personal terms. They visualize a situation in which they personally will be expected to give away considerable sums of money to far-off people whom they do not know nor care to know. And, you know, that in and of itself, I know in the United States, is the single biggest misunderstanding of the principle of sharing, and why nobody even wants to even talk about it or consider it, or they consider, you know, they skirt away the issue and don't even bring it up when you know,
That's right.
They would rather talk about something, you know. And even with the marching that's going on here about, you know, Black Lives Matter, about social justice and so forth, you know, nobody's talking about sharing. And what do you think, or how do you think Maitreya is going to galvanize those people to almost take a step back from what they're wanting, right, which is justice, those kind of things, and see that sharing must come first?
Well, you know, I say this simply as a matter of obvious fact of when people start listening to you or your shows, to this show, for example, and try to understand what we're really talking about, what sharing really is, and then talk about it with other people. And when then people read about the hostilities between this group and that group, the left and the right and the up and the down and all of that, they will perhaps have an idea that there is no ism. There is no ism in the world that will solve our problems, only the hearts and minds of people. And so that's where this perspective, this information has to go out into the hearts and minds of people so they will understand that it is not a competition between who is going to say, I have the only solution. And even if they say my solution is sharing, and then you get the Marxists and the socialists and the anti-socialists and all those people over your neck, but then they say, I'm going to push my solution down your throat. And that's what we have now. The principle of sharing is based on the understanding of the oneness. Literally, we swim in the same ocean as everyone else in the world. And that is where the principle of sharing, Maitreya's principle of sharing, his plan, is meant to apply on an international level. Now, when you do that automatically, because it automatically allocates certain ways of living in order to create this plan and to implement this plan. And Maitreya will suggest, I'm not putting words in his mouth, but this is what I understand after 30 some odd years, will suggest that because this plan, this international plan, is critical for the survival of this planet, its purpose is to allow each country to have its own resources and to have access to this pool of resources, will automatically put a perspective on individual lifestyles that will suggest to people that if they live in a simpler way, this plan will go forward. If they live in the way that people have been living, using 3/4 of the world's resources in the developed world, we will have major international, not only trouble, but with the technologies we have and the politics the way it is, we could well do ourselves in. That's how important it is to see ourselves in this oneness, subjective oneness. I don't mean uniformity, because everyone is different, but subjectively one people, all sons and daughters of God.
So again, with the problems about the concerns of people, so this has nothing to do with socialism,
No.
communism per se, right?
That's right. Those are isms. They are imposed, and Maitreya is talking about an evolution of consciousness and awareness expansion. The communism, the socialism are simply structures that have been imposed in the past. They've never worked because the people have not don't support it. But in this sense, people understanding, and this is all has to be done with free will. People. That's why the hearts and minds of people are the essential platform on which this plan will work.
So I guess my next question would be, he says something about making an inventory of all the resources and needs, which I remember Ben saying that every nation has something to give. Of course, every nation has needs and so forth. Some have greater needs than they can give. Others have greater gives than than they need, kind of deal, right? But how would that be centralized according to the master's plan and so forth? What would be the best way to do that?
Well, they would have either a master or a third degree disciple. I don't know if your audience understands all that, but people who could be detached and trusted, so to speak, who everyone would trust enough because of the voluntary aspect of all of this. And it would be perhaps a renovated United Nations structure.
Okay.
And there would be overseeing of this pool of resources. And you would have at all levels, you would have people who are not politicians looking out for themselves, but people who really have understood this plan, the need for the plan, and the need for trust, who would oversee all of this.
Okay.
So the masters are out incognito or behind the scenes, as Maitreya is, and they will also oversee anybody who is working in administration of this plan, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's highly idealistic, I agree. But if people can understand the need for it, and they would understand that no one is going to force them into it, I think they may be, if they think about it, they may think that this is not a bad way to go.
Yeah, I remember at work one day, this is probably right around the time of the election, there was a young man, he looked like he was about just old enough to vote, really. He wasn't much older than that if he was. And his shirt said, "Socialism never."
Yeah.
And I remember talking to one of my coworkers, and I said, "What kind of socialism is he referring to?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, we've lived in a socialist government my whole life, but it's just been corporate socialism for the rich, but not the poor. When it comes to giving money to the poor, then it's about hyperinflation. Oh my gosh, the house is on fire. Yeah. The whole, what's going to hit the fan. But when it comes to giving it to corporations, well, then that's a little bit better. It's a little bit more on track. That will get things moving. That's what we need, that kind of stuff. And yet, even the people who aren't really benefiting from it are supporting that type of system, which kind of is mind-boggling to me. If I was in a situation where my boss or whoever it was didn't like me and was supporting other people, I'm not going to support them. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to be their best friend. You know what I mean? But yet we do that with our governments, all the time. And so. Yes. But yeah, this is the other thing is how would you say that this tie? This is kind of a off the wall question, kind of, but on topic also. The way I see this workforce shortage, I don't know if you've been paying attention to it. It's been really much in my old scheme, my little world, because it's affecting my job because there's people that aren't wanting to work. And I think this is a beginning of what the masters are talking about. And one of Maitreya's also big priorities about the need for leisure.
Yes.
And I do think that this upcoming generation is about more leisure time than work time, And
yes.
How would the principle of sharing help satisfy some of the new generation's view on outlook on life? Like, I shouldn't have to work 80 hours a week and make a little money just to get ahead. I should be able to work, 20, 25 hours a week, still produce, contribute something to society in that way, but yet have the majority of time that I can do whatever I want. You know what I mean? How would that fit into that?
Well, I think people are changing their view of work right now, as you mentioned. And they are wonderfully, many of them, rediscovering the joy of family life. And so that's become maybe a priority, and heaven knows we need more family life in order to raise the children to be healthy. And so that's I think a priority in many people's lives. And with remote work, of course, you have the ability to do that. The question is whether the profit motive of corporations will overwhelm all of that. And at this point, I think the corporations are have their backs against the wall because, as you said, there many times they can't get workers. Now, there is a very cynical view that says, well, we have all of these immigrants coming in at the border, and they will fill the jobs because they are not aware of the at the same level as those who have lived in America for a long time or were born here. So I think we really don't know how long it will take this transformation into leisure, because there has to be some sort of structure, and actually, when you think about it, the joy of work is something that's not just sitting in an office pounding out whatever it is you pound out every day. Work is a part of self-development, certainly, but it can be done in more creative ways, so that you need leisure time to develop your talents, to have time to just be a human being, and all of the joy of that and the creativity and then the produce of that will bubble up automatically. So it's a question of undoing the stranglehold of materialism, basically buying and the selling and the profit. Once that is crippled, if you will, it's kind of a difficult word, but once that is broken or subsides or is no longer supported, then I think we're open to any kind of evolution that takes place in that regard. So it's a door we're approaching, and once that door is open, creativity itself on all levels and all kinds of people everywhere will do the rest, I think.
So sharing really is a very practical manifestation of one of the main qualities of the Aquarian energy, which is cooperation, no?
Yes. It is a manifestation of cooperation. It's automatic. When people are collaborative in their thinking, they automatically share. And look, I think of the Internet, for example. When the Internet first started, the people who literally bore the Internet, bore it and raised it, did not demand huge sums of money, hold the public ransom for what they had done. They just did it. They erected it, they populated it, and there it is. It was so easy and fast, and to me, as critical as the Industrial Revolution, maybe more so.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what people can do when the handcuffs are taken off, when the fear of not having something, when they just create for the joy of creating. And that, to me, is an energy that will really give us the future, whatever that produces. But it will be based on the idea of cooperation, and that automatically means sharing, just like in a family. People,
Mm-hmm.
well, there's always an uncle who doesn't cooperate, but everybody else kind of cooperates and they share. It's just like breathing,
Like the time I gave my nephew a little drum set. Is that not cooperating? So.
Oh, I bet you paid a price for that, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So, the other question I have is something that you actually brought up with the question is talking about who will really be over this type of worldwide mass program of aid, a master or somebody at least of the level of a third degree initiate. So,
yes.
Real quick, for those of us who haven't read the Ageless Wisdom Teachings, according to the Ageless Wisdom Teachings, there are 5 steps that every one of us will take or have taken in order to become a master. If we're listening to this program, we're not a master, so let's just get that out of the way. But the first one is the first initiation is marked in the Bible as the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. And the next one was symbolized as the baptism. So, and then the third is the transfiguration, the crucifixion, and then, of course, the resurrection. So, Betsy, I guess my question would be, someone who has taken the third or perhaps even the fourth initiation, but not yet a master, let's start with, who would be some historical figures in the past that would fit that level of evolution from the master's point of view? Third or fourth, not a fifth degree initiate, but just a third or fourth initiate.
Right. Well,
you kind of give us a sense of what you're talking about.
Lincoln in the political sphere, Shakespeare in his day. I'm thinking of a creative, a third degree initiate. I can't think of
Mozart, Beethoven.
Yeah, those are artists, but also in the field of culture in general. A third degree initiate would be the lowest on that ladder of qualification, but a third degree initiate will be driven by the soul. And so he or she would have the interest of humanity uppermost. That's what it takes to become a third degree initiate. You have to have a mastery over your own personal body desires, and then your emotional desires, and even your intellectual desires. So you would not be as prone to illusion as most people. And so that would be a very qualified person. And if it were someone with organizational capacities and basically very honest and devoted to the greater good, would be the qualifications. And then if you go up from there, you would have initiates of fourth degree, of course, would be more along the spiritual path, and that would be the path of inspiring, maybe teaching in various countries. And of course the masters inspire their disciples. All of these people would be disciples of one or the other of the masters. Whether Maitreya would be sitting back smoking a cigar and saying, well, let's just see how it's all going, I don't know. But it would be overseen. And if people had not had an experience of one of these masters or Maitreya, I understand it would be very difficult to intellectually understand the power that these masters and the higher initiates can have. They're very charismatic. They make you feel like you could do anything. They are totally approachable and harmless. They never push. It's all suggestion. In fact, all of the great ideas that inventors and everyday people have come up with are probably the result of an inspiration coming from some master at some level, filtering down through the plane. So there's no. I know it sounds intellectually like pie in the sky. Believe me, what my experience has been is that their presence, their influence is transformative in an individual's life. And so I personally have no fear or question at all that this would not be the most wonderful and joyful way for humanity to live under this plan of sharing.
Like I remember reading a bit of a poem from Federico Lorca. Do you remember who he was, the Spanish poet?
I've heard of him, yeah.
And he was ostracized by the powers that be and was eventually, I think, assassinated, if I'm not mistaken. But there was a bit of his poem on the back of Share International magazine, and it was entitled "The Greatest Spiritual Explosion." And he talks about how none of us can imagine how great the spiritual explosion would happen when the world ends hunger finally.
Yeah.
And that one day no one goes to bed hungry. Yeah. What would happen? The joy that would just explode, Yes. And only a poet could explain it like that, but it's just
it gives
how
me goosebumps. Yeah.
I know, right? I mean, how we're on the precipice of that type of experience.
Yes.
Ben always talked about the energies and how the divisions that we're seeing today, the turmoil, and I just read an article from Benjamin Creme's master. He talked about how most of us are experiencing this time as very tumultuous, very painful, but yet from another point of view, from a more discerned look, it's actually a time of renewal. It's a time of hope,
Yes.
But how difficult it is, the time we're living, but yet how once things start moving in the other direction, how fast and how far it's going to swing in the other direction towards synthesis, cooperation, brother. I don't even think you and I, who have known this information for decades, really understand truly how it will be, in a very practical sense. I have to kind of leave my mind open to it too. Like, I don't know how it's going to look, for that very reason like that, because I'm sorry.
Well, it'll be a creative act, this whole thing. But, if people, I think anyone in your audience may have done what I call a solid for someone. You've helped somebody out of a bad situation. That feeling that you got when they looked at you as you did it, or when they thanked you, or when you saw them the next time, if you remember that feeling in yourself and in the person that you helped, and you expand that to the world, that's the atmosphere that we will live in.
I didn't even think about it from that standpoint. That's powerful.
But that'll be it, you see. Open and thrilling, and just makes you weep.
I remember one of the things that Benjamin Creme said. He had. Do you remember when he talked about the first time he saw Maitreya in that vision? And he could see. The masters don't see time. For those of us who are coming new to this information, the masters don't see time the way that we see time. They see it as one, happening now, past, present, and future. And so when back in the 50s, when Benjamin Creme had just started working with his master, he had an experience with Maitreya, who eventually asked him to take part in helping his process of coming back into the everyday world if he so chose. I can't remember the exact words he used, but that's kind of a synopsis of it. And at that time, Maitreya gave him an experience of what the masters and how the masters see time. And the one thing that he said, he could see instances in the past, historical times in the past, that looked like they were happening now, and then he saw things that were happening now, and then he could also, what he said was that he didn't even have to turn his head. He could see what was going to happen in the future as the masters see it. And the one thing that it really almost makes me cry every time I see it, or think about it. But he said he saw people running down the street after hearing Maitreya, and for the first time, their life actually mattered to them.
That's right. Can you imagine?
And how we all have that spiritual starvation in our own lives in some way, because we're all living separate lives, feeling that we're competing against one another, being afraid of our neighbors, being afraid of what's happening on the other side of the world, and we don't trust our governments the way we should, and because our governments have lied to us. And so we really, for most of us, we're on an island, and that island is very tiny, and the water is filled with a bunch of sharks, and it's just any step in the wrong direction, and the next thing you know, that's toast for you, right? That's basically the way we all kind of live our lives, right? And how, I'm sorry to say this, but but just to take it, to where we see each other as family. I can't imagine that, but it all starts with the principle of sharing. And the one thing that you and I were talking about before this call was about healing diseases, and the master talked about how diseases of all kinds are caused by us not seeing ourselves in the right relationship with each other, with our higher self, and with the environment as a whole, right? And I had asked you, talking about the principle of sharing, relating it to curing diseases, right? And you brought up a really good point, and I would love for you to continue on with that, if you don't mind, about nuclear radiation, if you don't mind, and then we can try to wind up the conversation over that. That'd be great.
Yes. Well, we have this nuclear radiation that is poisoning the planet more than CO2 or gas or whatever, oil, everything. It comes from all the nuclear work that's being done. It certainly comes from the power plants, which are spewing this radiation out. It comes at such high levels that we don't have the technology to measure it yet. Our Geiger counters are basically advancements on 1950s technology. So people don't believe that this is true, but the masters say this is true, and this is what is debilitating the human immune system, for example, and bringing on early Alzheimer's. That's a whole another subject, certainly. But so we are living in this nuclear world, polluted as it is, and you can talk about the UFOs and our space brothers and how they come and mop up the excess. But if we understand the oneness of humanity, if we understand the potential for this joy in a human family, there would be no need for nuclear fission. As you know, it started with the Axis powers and the Allies and the Nagasaki and Hiroshima dropping that bomb. And so we have created, out of a sense of that war, that separation, and the separative attitudes of the Axis power, and I'm thinking of Hitler and his trying to build a pure race, for example. That's a gross separation there. We would, if the principle of sharing were uppermost in people's mind, we would have found other ways than nuclear to resolve those problems back then. And if we understood the interconnection of of all life, and human life in particular, we would not be manifesting this nuclear radiation constantly. It is when you talk to people who are pushing nuclear radiation, or nuclear fission as a bridge to some future sustainability. I always say, but it's not clean, it's not green, it's not affordable, and the waste products pollute the planet and the people forever. But they have their corporate material, money, profit motives for it, and that's the only reason they keep pushing it. So if we understand the oneness of humanity, the joy of sharing, the trust that would be necessary for manifestation or living under the principle of sharing, who would in his right mind kill people that way? They wouldn't. They would say, "Oh my God, we have to stop this right now." And of course, you and I know the Space Brothers have the technology to mop it all up once we give it up. So for me, again, the principle of sharing is based on the oneness, the realization in the hearts and the minds of people of the oneness and the interconnectedness of all people. We are responsible for each other. And we would never continue this. Even if we say, well, we have it now, we have to do something, but we would not continue with nuclear fission. There are alternatives, and there will be a major alternative in the future.
Well, Betsy, thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you come back and we can continue the conversation at a shorter time interval than it was the last time, for sure.
Okay.
Would love to have you come back.
Thank you, Gary.
All righty. Anything else you would like to add?
I think that'll do it for this time.
Awesome. And I definitely, you've given me a lot to think about, for sure. So hopefully you've done it for everybody else. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Betsy.
Take action.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
SOP, save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.